How do you explain? How do you describe a love that goes from east to west?
Hello again. This is the second lesson we're going to do over the topic of abortion. In this discussion, we're going to talk about life's beginning and the different philosophical views of this process. We know that human reproduction is sexual in nature. It takes a sperm from the male, an ovum from the female, or an egg. Each of these contain 23 chromosomes. When they join together, a human has 46 chromosomes. This happens by active insemination, either through intercourse or artificially with in vitro or in utero insemination, and you also have implantation after fertilization. This is a good diagram taken from the Encyclopedia Britannica. You have the ovary that releases the egg or the ovum into the fallopian tube. At some point prior to this, the sperm has been introduced into the female, and it joins up with the egg and fertilizes the egg, and then you have zygote formation, and then you have mitosis to 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, and so on and so forth, until that zygote or that blastocyst implants itself into the uterine wall. Now, many have argued that human life begins at conception or fertilization, and I would agree with this. Before this process, you have 23 chromosomes in the sperm, where the sperm by itself will not produce a new human. You have 23 chromosomes from the egg from the woman that will not produce a new human. It takes fertilization and the combining of both to form that 46 chromosome human. And at this point, you don't have an organism that is its mother. You don't have an organism that is its father. It is truly its own entity. So if you don't have human life without fertilization, and you don't have human life before fertilization. So this is why many, and myself included, would argue that this is truly the beginning of life. Some would argue that implantation is the beginning of human life, but it's really kind of a faulty argument, because you don't really have a new creature at this point. You just have that creature implanting itself into the lining of the uterine wall so that it can receive nourishment and protection. I always joke with my friends who get pregnant and they're hungry and want to eat. I'm like, oh, of course you're hungry. You got a little parasite. Well, it's a joke, of course, but it works along the same lines. A parasite attaches itself to the intestine wall to receive nutrients. The zygote does the same thing. It attaches itself to the uterine wall so that it can receive blood, oxygen, nutrients, and things along those lines. When we look at the human stage of development, again, this is from the first lesson that we did. This is up to 8.5 weeks. Human development happens very, very quickly, and we've looked at this already, so we won't spend a great deal of time on it. Another argument that we have for the origin of human life, or the beginning of human life, is the idea of viability. That is the ability of an organism to survive outside of the uterus. The problem with some of the arguments that we're going to have after this is that they're relative in nature. Whereas you have fertilization, where it's a specific point in time, we can put our finger on it, we can measure it. The rest of this is just kind of up in the air as to what the guidelines should be. I took these guidelines these parameters from the study done by Sari in 2008, and what they were trying to do was put parameters around when is it either too early or the infant is too small, born preterm or premature. When is it just not going to survive? When should we just quit with all medical efforts to save the life of this child? And that's what the point of this study was. But I put it on here just to kind of give a ballpark of parameters. And again, the problem with the viability argument is we've had children survive at 21 weeks or 20 weeks. So again, this is very relative in nature. Another problem that I have with this is, being an ICU nurse, I've worked with a lot of adults who have been on ventilators and on medications to keep their heart going or keep their blood pressure up, or machines to work for their kidneys. And you take any of these things away from these adults and they would die. They wouldn't be viable without it. So if you're defining life based solely on its ability to survive on its own, that's a very slippery slope. That's a very difficult argument to make, because you take a 4-year-old child, it'll starve if it's not fed by someone. So it's a very relative argument to make. Another argument is something that's new as of the past few decades. It's the idea of self-realization. Peter Singer's been a very large proponent of this for years. It's this idea that a person is only a person when he or she knows that they are a person. They are cognitive enough to realize the world around them and their position in that world. And this has really been an argument that has put infanticide, or killing a child after it's born, it's put it on the same ground as abortion, and given them equal terms. Now, for many years, people of the pro-life movement, including myself, has made the argument that there's no difference between a child that's in the womb and outside the womb. If you can kill a child, or if it's wrong to kill a child outside the womb, it should be wrong to kill a child in the womb. Well, the problem is that this has kind of been sported by the other side of the movement. These researchers here, Jubilini and Minerva, in 2012, they produced this article, Afterbirth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? I believe this is the Australian Journal of Medical Ethics. In this article, they say we take person to mean an individual who is capable of attributing to her own existence some at least basic values, such that being deprived of this existence represents a loss to her. In other words, if you take something from the child, if they don't realize that you're doing it, then they're not truly a person. In this article, they talked about children that are a drain on their families when they're born, whether Down syndrome or other mental illnesses or some physical abnormalities. This is kind of a big issue, and I after reading the article, it kind of scares me, because what you have going on is you have someone placing value on someone else's life. You're not saying, okay, life begins at some point in time, like the argument with conception or fertilization. You have a concrete point in time where you have two things coming together that do not create a new creature by itself, and when they're joined together, a new creature is formed. You have that with fertilization and conception. You don't have that with this. What you have is a group of people placing value on someone else's human life. In other words, I have a child who's born with Down syndrome. Well, they'll never be a football player. They'll never be able to throw a baseball 85, 90 miles an hour. So I don't value that human being. I don't value that human being because they're not my bouncing blue-eyed baby. And I say blue-eyed for a reason. This has been a problem for centuries, where you have individuals placing value or devaluing another human being's life based on a set framework of qualifications. And when you get into this, I have a quote here from Charles Darwin, and I want you to follow my train of thought on this. You have somebody placing value or devaluing someone that they seem or that they think is inferior. Okay? So when we look at Charles Darwin, everybody knows Charles Darwin for the theory of evolution and his work in the origins of species. But this is actually the second volume to that book, The Descent of Man, where he talks about specifically evolution within man. And he says on page 156 there, at some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will most certainly exterminate and replace savage races throughout the world. At the same point, when the anthropomorphous apes, as Professor Schaffhausen has remarked, will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we hope, even than the Caucasian, and some ape as low as baboon, instead of now between the Negro, Australian, and the gorilla. Okay, I'm not saying here that Charles Darwin is condoning genocide. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am showing you with this quote is Charles Darwin, and the theory that he is pushing is saying that there is a scale, there is a timeline, or not necessarily a timeline, but there is this from higher to lower evolution of man. where you have the civilized state. And notice who he uses in the civilized state when he talks about maybe there'll be one come up that's more civilized than the Caucasian. He's putting Caucasian at the far end of the spectrum. And who does he put at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to the human race? Who does he mention? The Negro and the Australian Aborigine. Okay? Now he's saying that there's going to be a larger gap and that the civilized men will kill these savage men. The civilized being more the Caucasian, the savage being more the Negro or the Aborigine. I take very strong issue with this ideology, with this mentality. Now, I'm not saying again that Charles Darwin is condoning genocide, but he's allowing for the framework for someone to devalue someone else's humanity. He's allowing and theorizing this ideology that a Caucasian is more civilized than a Negro or than an Aborigine, and that for that reason he has more value. And I take strong issue with this mentality. And as we know, this is a false ideology. So when we hold Charles Darwin's theory up on a pedestal, we better be very strongly aware of the implications of every aspect of his ideology and his theory. When we look at this into practice, and I like using the U.S. example in eugenics. Eugenics was the idea that you could have good genes. You get rid of bad genes. You have disease. You have problems in the human civilization because you have bad genes. Okay, that's what eugenics, that whole movement was for. And Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was very much an advocate for this eugenics movement in the U.S. If you ask yourself why there's so many Planned Parenthoods, why they're predominantly found in urban settings, in predominantly black neighborhoods, this is a very large reason for that. Margaret Sanger was a huge advocate for the eugenics movement. Some could even call it very racist. Now, I do want to clarify some stuff. This wasn't just white against black or white against Hispanic. This was an idea that's a lot more specific than that. Okay, not only did they discriminate against the Africans and against the Hispanics, but they also discriminated against Eastern Europeans and Jews. And this becomes very important because, as I quoted, or as I put there on the last point of this slide, the Nazis, the German physicians and higher-ups at the Nuremberg trials, when they were being tried by the world for their atrocities during the Holocaust, they cited the U.S. eugenics movement, and specific eugenics, people like Margaret Sanger. But in 1927, in Buck versus Bell, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Virginia's sterilization of quote-unquote unfit. Now, I'm going to talk about that term unfit and who they threw into this category a little bit later on, but there were roughly 60,000 sterilizations in the U.S. from 1909 to 1960s, 20,000 in California alone. Oregon, one of the 33 states that did this, they abolished their Board of Eugenics in 1983. That wasn't that long ago, guys. It took them that long to destroy, to abolish this board that was an advocate for this movement that was trying to get better genes. And by getting better genes, you had to get rid of those bad genes. And of course, I'm using that very sarcastically, that come from Eastern Europe or from Africa or from South America. And of course, looking back on it now, especially with everything that's happened over the past few years with President Obama, it really kind of puts a black eye on this entire movement, just for the simple fact of their oppression of these different classes of people and their injustice in that. But anyway, to continue on with this lesson, Oregon, in 1983, it was interesting that castration was preferred over vasectomies. In other words, they wouldn't just sterilize them by preventing sperm to getting into the ejaculate. No. We're going to cut their testicles off. So that was preferred in Oregon, which I found very, very interesting. Continuing on with this eugenics movement, the Tuskegee Experiments that happened in Tuskegee, Alabama. I like using this as an example because it gives us a good timeline and it gives us a good idea of some of the issues that we had with this mentality. Again, it goes back to the Charles Darwin belief and some of the stuff today where we're devaluing human life. They're not as valuable as we are because X, Y, and Z, either because they don't have full mental capacity or they don't have all their limbs, or they're not able to run fast enough, they're not able to throw fast enough, they're not tall enough. Whatever we use, whatever parameters a group of people uses to devalue human life, that's what they're going to throw in there. And that's what Charles Darwin that's exactly what he was doing. We have civilized men, the Caucasian, and we have savage races like the Aborigine and the Negro. It shows this philosophical viewpoint that you have greater value in the things that you value in human life. Anyway, the Tuskegee Experiments happened, they began, I believe, in 1937. Now, the interesting thing about this whole thing was it didn't end until 1972. Now, the Tuskegee Experiments, it was conducted by the public health system, the CDC had their hand in it, and the Tuskegee Institute, where you had physicians and you had researchers studying roughly 600 black men. 400 of them had syphilis. They were examined without informed consent. Now, informed consent's a major thing when you start talking about code of ethics with research. And a lot of the Nuremberg trials and the issues that the Nazis did and performed on the Jews, that's what brought about the code of ethics when it came to research. The interesting thing about this whole thing is what they were wanting to study was if the syphilis lifespan was the same with black men as it was with whites. Okay? Which, when they started in 1937, they didn't have a cure for syphilis. Penicillin, which was the cure for syphilis, came available in 1943, 6 years after the experiment started. Not a single one of these individuals were treated. Their families passed on syphilis. Not a single one of these individuals were treated for syphilis. This experiment didn't end until 1972 when a whistleblower finally put an end to it and said enough is enough. And my issue is we put the Nazi Germans on trial for their atrocities that they performed on the Jews because they seem to think that the Jews had less value in human life than what they did. The white blue-eyed male with blonde hair. And we were doing the same thing back here in the U.S. These men were black sharecroppers from the South, and it wasn't just some private institution. This was done by our federal government. When we look at Nazi Germany and we talk about this, of course, I've alluded to them already. I don't like spending a lot of time with the Nazi Germans because even people that did evil things would say that the Germans were evil just because of the amount of people they killed, even though Stalin in Russia killed roughly 8 to 9 million more people than Hitler did. But either way, the Fernald School in Waltham, Massachusetts, at its height it had 2,500 individuals. They were children. They were labeled, quote-unquote, feeble-minded. In other words, they weren't as smart. They didn't have the full cognitive ability as some other individuals. They consisted of predominantly poor and uneducated individuals. And this is a quote from Michael D'Antonio. I believe he was one of the children that were in this school. And you can go back. I want to say ABC did a special on this. You can always go back and type this in Google and look it up for yourself. It's very interesting. But he says, idiot, imbecile, moron were all medical terms that were used to define various levels of retardation or disability. Moron was coined to describe children who were almost normal. Now notice these kids, they don't learn very well. They have a disability. And moron was almost normal. So you take kids that have ADHD now. You take kids that have autism and Asperger's now. You take kids that have dyslexia now. These kids could have very well been thrown into one of these categories, especially if they were poor. Okay? Because they just couldn't learn. They had problems with different aspects of cognitive functioning. So therefore, they were kind of thrown into the school. Now, issue with this school is in 1994, the Senate hearings revealed that MIT fed radioactive oatmeal. I wish I made this up. MIT fed radioactive oatmeal to the boys who believed they were in a science club. in a nutrition study for Quaker oats. To give you a good time scale, the Nuremberg trials happened roughly 10 years before this experiment began. So the whole code of ethics when it came to experiments, I guess it was kind of thrown out the window. Each received $60,000 from the MIT, Quaker Oats, and the federal government for the things that went on at this school. My issue with all of this, my issue when we look at this entire thing in its entirety, is that when you start devaluing human life based on your assumptions of what human life should be, that is a faulty argument. That is a slippery slope, and it has led to these things. It has led to racism, it has led to discrimination, and it has led to atrocities here and abroad. And when we start looking at the Christian's viewpoint of abortion later on, I want you to think about this with relation to abortion. Okay? Either a child is going to be born in a family that can't take care of itself, or a child is born with Down syndrome. If our ideology is that child should not survive because it will either bring down the value of the life of the family, or it does not have value within itself because it is not normal, that child is not normal, I would argue we are doing the same thing that these evil individuals have done for millennia to give whatever reason they need to devalue another's humanity. So when we think about this, I want you to think of all of its implications. I want you to think of its history, and I want you to look at it with eyes that are open to things that have gone on and that things that will go on. Thank you.